thank you all for coming out on a Monday night. Chris, thanks for spending time with us on a Monday night and for spending so much time with me today. He was on the morning news with us, on KTLA Morning News, and then he did my podcast for me, and now you're sitting again with me. You must be sick of me at this point.
I know you're dying for a compliment.
I am. I'm fishing. Stop anything.
So I'll let it just float there. I guess you're sick of me. Just let it float in the air and breathe a little, as we say. Let it breathe. No, it's great to be here. I like this. It's very much the thrust stage here, right? This is great.
Yeah. 3 conversations today, but we've barely scratched the surface. Your book, Bobby Kennedy, Raging Spirit, wonderfully written. You brought Bobby Kennedy to life for me. I was 4 years old when he was assassinated down the street here at the Ambassador Hotel, so I only know Bobby Kennedy through snapshots. And you really brought him to life. And I guess we all know Bobby Kennedy as this child of privilege who became the advocate for the everyman and every woman. And I just wonder, as you were writing this book and doing the research, did you find that was innate in Bobby Kennedy to be this person, or was it something that developed over time?
Well, the old nurture versus nature thing, right? Which is always the big question in life about everything. It's a mix. I'm a big believer in birth order, and I think I'm married to Wendy, the ultimate oldest daughter. She's very responsible, and she's the leader of her 4 siblings, and I really believe my older brother is like he was born at 35 or something. He was always very mature, and I believe the second tends to be the maverick, the interesting one. I'm second, and
I was gonna say, where are you?
And then you get the one in the middle who feels overlooked, and they become very social, and they make friends outside the family. That was a pattern exactly the same in my wife's family and my family. We were all both 5, and the middle one becomes the big socialite because there's not much room left in the family for them. It's already done. You got this stolid fellow parent, which is the oldest kid. Then you get the maverick. So what's left? You got to go outside. And so Bobby was way down in the list. He was 7 out of 9, and by the time he had 4 sisters between him and his older brothers, and right in the order there. And he was totally overlooked by his father. His father had no time for him. He called him a runt. Basically mocked him for being short. He was 5'8". The brothers were all 6 foot big guys and incredibly confident and winners. And Bobby was this quiet guy and awkward. He would always be. His brother was elegant. Jack was elegant. Bethel, when I first met her to talk about the book a couple of years ago, when I was writing my book about Jack, she said Jack knew how to walk. He knew just how to hold a golf club. Everything was elegant with him. And Bobby was always awkward. He had to learn everything he did. He's always learning. Nothing came natural. And and the old man looked down on him, ignored him. He had a struggle for his father's attention. His father's not a good guy. And I think he carried that on his shoulder his whole life. And I think that's how he sort of identified with the overlooked people of the world. He sort of got it, and I think I could go through, for example, when he was a kid, I'm Catholic, and I know all about this because I grew up with it 20 years later. There's a Catholic priest named Feeney, and he was preaching in the Harvard Square, and he had a little community there. He basically talked these kids out of quitting Harvard and joining his little cult. It was driving everybody crazy, but he said no salvation outside the church. So if you're Jewish, you're going to hell, the whole thing. He was totally into that. And the church eventually excommunicated him for that belief. And but Bobby went crazy over it. So he's saying, everybody else goes to hell but us? This is ridiculous. And he writes a letter puts an article in the paper, he writes the cardinal, and he really raises hell about it. Rose Kennedy's mother's scared to death he's going to get in trouble with the church. And Bobby just was that kind of guy. He just looked out for other people, like other outsiders. And his friends at school, where he hung out with a townie. He didn't hang out with the rich kids. When he got to Harvard, he hung out with the jocks. He didn't hang out at the fancy clubs. When he got in the Navy, when he was an enlisted guy, as a swabby, he always, as Ethel said, he was born a Democrat. You laugh, but I like those people. And I first began collecting string on him when I was a Capitol cop back in '71. My first job after the Peace Corps was a patronage job. The deal was I'd work in the office, answer mail and all that stuff, and then at night work as a cop. That's the only. Harry Reid started this. Barnacle started like this. That was the way the old patronage system worked. And there's always patronage jobs doing the mail room, patronage jobs doing the elevator. Even though the elevators were automatic, they'd have somebody standing there because somebody's connected. And I remember that this building engineer I used to hang out with told me that the only Democratic liberal senator who always said hello to the police was Bobby. And that told me everything I wanted to know about the guy, because I always thought he was a big liberal and caring about minorities. Yeah, but he also cared about the cops, the regular guys. And that was true about him. I mean, I came across Jack Newfield, the great liberal columnist from New York, who said that Bobby's people were cops, waitresses, and firefighters, regular people, mostly, Irish, Italian, whatever, working people. And they were his people. Even though he was looking out for minorities, those were his people. And he never betrayed them. And I think that would be very nice to see that today, because our politics now is sort of divided. This picture is one of the reasons I wrote the book right here, that picture. That's why I cared about this guy, Bobby. Because that picture, not only is it beautifully photographed, it's almost 3D, there's the working class, poor, not even working class, dirt poor white family along the Jersey train tracks. The wife looks like she's got nothing. The father has some. He's wearing. It looks like he must have been in the Navy once. It looks like because he knows how to do that salute, and he's got his kid doing it with him. This is a gut patriotism toward a political leader. You don't have anything like this. Not on the left, certainly. And we don't have this gut love of country and gut patriotic sense of a patriotic leader. And the Kennedy brothers were all like that. They all served in the military. One of them got killed. One almost got killed. And Bobby went in as a swabby because he was too young to get in any sooner. They were the real thing. And the working people of the country knew it. They weren't celebrities. They were patriots. And I think I wanted to show that there was a time when the Democrats could appeal to the white working class in a way that today there's too much talk about deplorables and people clinging to their guns and religion, and that whole condescension number was not, the Kennedys had nothing to do with that. Nor did Bill Clinton either. Bill Clinton had none. Bill Clinton was not condescending. He knew how to connect with everybody. And so whatever had happened since has happened since.
We were talking earlier about the fact that both of our dads were enlisted guys in the Navy.
Yeah.
And you write about the fact that Bobby joined the Navy as an enlisted man. He was training to be an officer, but made an appeal to join as an enlisted man. So
he wanted in.
He wanted in. And he writes letters home about these guys that he meets, who are not children of privilege.
They're Southern white guys. The Navy's always appealed to Southerners, and they all join, and it's just a tradition down south, and they talk a different language. But I got to know some of these guys as a cop, and I was the college kid in the ranks, and all this demonstrating is going on in '71, and one country boy, a friend of mine, Leroy Taylor, white guy, came up to me and he took me aside, and he was a real right-winger, there's no doubt about it. And he goes, Chris, you know why the little man loves his country? And I said, no. He says, it's all he's got. I never forgot that. Because the guy who's been in the service and didn't have a lot of money or a beautiful family or a beautiful house or anything, he didn't have anything going for him. He's got his country and its gut. And a lot of big shot politicians ought to learn that, and they don't. They don't get it, how patriotic people really are. And you better appeal to them on that basis, or you're going to be the enemy.
Let's talk about Bobby and Jack and their relationship. And one of the revelations to me was, again, as a guy who knows the Kennedys through snapshots in history, I always see the two of them together and assume that they have this great relationship from the beginning.
Yeah.
And you really revealed that Jack was annoyed at his dark and brooding little brother from the beginning.
Well, Eunice, I think, said that's always been an illusion. People thought they were buddies, but it was politics that brought them together. In 1946, the first campaign they worked together, Bobby had just gotten out of the Navy. He was sort of gloomy Gus, Debbie Downer type. He was not fun. He was sort of Montgomery Cliff. Would have played him pretty well. He's just brooding. And so Jack sees him come to work the campaign. He tells Red Fade, let's get a picture of him and me together, and then let's get him out of here. We just want everybody to see that the brothers come home from the service to help me in this campaign. Well, let's move him out. So he takes him to a play. In those days, I don't know anything about this, but in those days they had live shows to go with movies. So Red Fade, this guy had been in the Navy with Jack, and a fun guy. I've met him. And he takes him to a show and just laughs his butt off the whole show. And the guy sitting next to him said, like his best friend just died. And he said, that was Bobby. So to get rid of him, they sent him off to the Italian wards, 3 Italian wards in East Cambridge, where they didn't think they were going to do too well. Because the opponent his name was Cotter, too. I don't know what his appeal to the Italians was, but he had some kind of connection. And Bobby spent the whole time, then the 3 or 4 weeks he was working there, just sort of playing softball with the kids. And they loved him. He was not a snob, and he connected that way. But it was much later, after I wrote a piece about this for the Globe a couple weeks ago, the Boston Globe. Why did a guy who was this loner type, sort of awkward, unpleasant guy to be around, Black Robert is what Jack called him, Black Robert. And he was afraid that if he got near any of the campaign people, he would depress them. Like, what's that movie, William H. Macy, The Cooler?
Yeah.
About the guy in Vegas they put next to the high rollers to make him lose? Because they're such downers, people start losing when they're around them. And he was like that. But somehow, from 1946, when he's not really much fun to have around, he comes back in 52, and Jack basically begs him to come and run his campaign. He's unbelievable. He's going from this kind of loner kid to being this tyro, this incredible figure in Massachusetts politics. Jack said at the end of the campaign, nobody liked him, but he ran the best campaign in the history of the state. He had the best organization. And I could only figure out what did it for him was football, that he had played Harvard football, he had become a jock, hung out with the jocks. And I know that my wife keeps saying, why are you advocating football? And I know because it's dangerous. Head injuries, I'm well aware of that. But there are pluses. And one of them is it builds physical courage, and it gives you confidence, and you're out there when you really are. And he was a tight end, and he'd been tackled a few times, but he'd always get up and be like a wild Indian, is what Ken O'Donnell said. He was so Geronimo. I'm going to win the next play.
At 5'8" and 160.
Yeah, he was just skinny.
Pounds.
He shouldn't be on any football field, even. And he did it. He had broke his leg, and he still wanted to play. They ended up giving him a letter. He was just so gung-ho. He got a touchdown the first game of second year, and then he broke his leg on the field. And anyway, he became this leader and tough guy. And he brings all these fellow jocks. They're all GI Bill guys. They're not aristocrats. Back to Hyannisport after that Thanksgiving. And the old man is just blown away. My son's not only hanging out with the jocks, he is one. And these guys were awful, oafish. Like, jocks are awful, pretty much, Let's not kid ourselves. We like them on the field, but not too close, And they're all drinking his booze and smoking his cigars and rifling through his books, his library books, and acting like they own the place. And anyway, but Bobby was almost saying to his father, "You want me to be tough? You think I'm too sweet? I'll be tough. You want this? Is this what you want?" And that's what he did want. Well, the old man wanted him to be tough, and he became this tough, ruthless character in politics. For all the years, the old man was still aware of what was going on. And I do believe, if you look at the pattern of the book, by the time the old man gets a stroke and is incapacitated, Bobby starts to become Bobby again. And by the end of his life, he's actually a good guy. He's always got the spirit of right and wrong, but he begins to act out of empathy instead of big St. Michael the Archangel with a sword, going around killing people like Jimmy Hoffa and Dave Beck and Roy Cohn and Lyndon Johnson. He didn't like a lot of people, but he was on the right side, he thought. And later on in life, as one of his family members said, he decided that villains take care of their own lives. They end up creating their own hells on earth. And mass shooters end up in their own gunfire, and assassins end up horrible. And so they take care of themselves. He said, I'm going to spend the rest of my life worrying about the victims. And so he began to focus on poor blacks and poor whites and Native Americans and California farm workers, Cesar Chavez. And he became a real tribune, and he just said, this is what I want to do. Nobody else is doing it. I'm going to do it. And it really identified him. But he really wanted to be tough for his old man. His old man didn't like soft and didn't like generosity or empathy. The old man was not a good guy. And when you read the book, you're going to realize about his affinity for the Nazis, how he accepted them. He thought they had a PR problem, is what he put it. He said, it's not that what you're doing to the Jewish people, it's that you're making too big a deal about it. That's what he said to the German ambassador. It's horrible, man. And of course, the brothers had to outlive him, and they all became patriots, I believe, to just make up for the old man, because he wasn't one. And they all went in the military and did everything they could to make it for the country. And he didn't have it. He just didn't have that American feel.
We talked about, back to the relationship between Bobby and Jack, and earlier I asked you about the fact that why did Jack, or at what point did Jack sort of come around to see the utility of Bobby?
Yeah.
And it was during these
52 campaign.
And through that utility of realizing that Bobby could say no, and Bobby could be the bad cop to his good cop as the candidate.
That's what he liked. He wanted people to hate Bobby.
Did their friendship grow, though? Did they really?
Oh, they were so
bonded?
close. Well, it was really. I don't want to get one-sided. I've written books about them both, and a couple of books about Jack. Jack was the kind of guy who everybody liked. He was charming. But if you notice the people people that really win you over like that, they also can be secretly kind of cold, because they don't really care. They're fun. Jack always liked people around him who were fun. He was like, somebody once said, Chuck Spaulding, the guy closest to him, said, it was like you're at a fair, like the World's Fair. Every day you're with him. It's fun. But Jack didn't want anybody around him more than a day or so. And that included Jackie. He did not like people hanging around him. He got tired of people very quick, and he hated being alone, which I also understand. He liked to be with somebody for about a day. He wanted fresh company.
So I won't be with you tomorrow, Chris.
No, you got a few more hours. Fresh company, so it's sort of like, I keep thinking it's like him in a hospital bed, because Jack was in a hospital bed almost all his life. And he was always sick, always dying of something. It was just horrendous. And he did like people visiting him, but not for long. And near the end of his life, Jackie had built this house out in Virginia, in Hunt Country, and he said to his buddy, Lem Billings, how do we get stuck here? And whereas Bobby also loved Ethel, and Jack couldn't understand marrying somebody for life. He couldn't understand making a commitment to somebody else.
Yeah.
He married, as he put it with Jackie, she was the only woman I could have married. Figure that one out. He knew he had to get married, so he married the queen, the princess, and she made the statement he wanted to make. I'm not just another Irish guy. Look at her. I'm better than that. So she accomplished the goal he had, and she impressed him, but I don't think it's the same as as Bobby and Ethel. Bobby and Ethel were real, and I think that Jack looked up to Bobby morally. If you look at a lot of the quotes in the book, he just was overwhelmed at Bobby's ethics and his moral rightness. Jack was always messing around with women, and Bobby was leaving him alone until he got him into trouble. And then he would go and say, Johnny, you got to get rid of this guy Sinatra. You can't hang out. He's mobbed up. You got to get away from him. He's going to get you. Because that was a huge problem. When breaking with Sinatra was horrendous. And then the other one was Judy Campbell, who was this beautiful Jackie lookalike that Jack was hanging around with. And Hoover, of course, was looming over the whole thing, J. Edgar Hoover. And there are 70 phone calls. And he sends the word to Kenny O'Donnell and to Evelyn Lincoln, what's this about? He knew what it was about. J. Edgar Hoover was weird, and he was a snoop. And he also knew how to collect power on these guys by collecting stuff on them they didn't want anybody else to know about. So Bobby gets the message through his top aide to Jack, you got to cut off this relationship. Because the problem was, it wasn't that he had an affair, it was he was having an affair with Sam Giancana's girlfriend, the Godfather, the guy who succeeded Al Capone, who hung people up on meat hooks. He was a hitman. And he's sleeping with his girlfriend. What is he, crazy? And Bobby said, you got to drop this. Bobby really, but it took Hoover to come in and cut it off. Of course, the whole complicated thing with Giancana was that not only was he sleeping with his girlfriend, Giancana was using the CIA to go after somebody he thought was sleeping with somebody else, Phyllis McGuire, another one of his treats. And when she was hanging out with Dan Rowan, and he was trying to catch them in the act, and it's complicated. But the thing is that Jack, let's see. So Bobby's prosecuting criminals. Giancana, mobbed up labor guys like David Beck and Hoffa. He's going after all this incredible cast of horrors. And meanwhile, the CIA has hired Giancana to kill Castro. So he feels like he's getting a free ticket out of all this. Why are they still prosecuting me? What's going on here? And then Bobby becomes the Attorney General. The first thing he does is he sees what happened when all those mobsters got together in Appalachia, New York. Remember when all the black cars got together, and they finally figured out these guys all know each other. And they understand there's such thing as the mafia, but Hoover won't accept it. But Bobby went, I want a list of every top mobster, every mafia figure in the country, and I want to have a plan for getting every one of them. And then he went out and hired Mort Kaplan, who I've known. Mort Kaplan was head of the IRS under Kennedy. He had taught them at UVA Law School. I taught Bobby. He brought him in for a specific purpose of going after their tax returns the way they caught Al Capone, using tax returns. And so Bobby was a zealous chaser of bad guys. And meanwhile, his brother's sleeping with him. The CIA's using him. Oh yeah, and his father got money from Giancana to help in West Virginia, with some sort of Machiavellian intent to try to draw him into the operation. I can understand where Bobby always wondered if the mob had something to do with the horrors that came, even though he could never nail it. He was always worried, did I do something that had something to do with all this? Even though he accepted the Warren Commission. And so did Teddy accept it. But
when he was appointed Attorney General, he didn't want to be Attorney General, right?
I think he did.
He wanted something else, I thought.
I think he wanted it.
He wanted it.
Yeah, the old man wanted him to have it, and he acted like he didn't want it, but they set that meeting up with Siegenthaler to watch as if he had to be talked into it. I think Bobby wanted to be Attorney General, and I think he did sound tired chasing bad guys, but he got into it again. He liked doing it. And no, the Justice Department building now is named after him. He was one hell of an Attorney General. Yeah. And he fought the desegregation. He fought for desegregation. He got James Meredith into Ole Miss. He fought for the Freedom Riders. His top guy, Siegenthaler, he had his head bashed in with a lead pipe, and John Lewis writes about this and talked about it, and it's all in the book. Harry Belafonte was all part of this. They thought Bobby was something else. Bobby really was the real thing, and he believed law could be for justice. He wouldn't have bought this distinction between black lives and the cops. He would say, no, proper law is for justice. Whether it's fighting segregationists or it's fighting mobsters or criminals on the street, law should be for justice. And if there's a violation of the law enforcement authority, he would stop it. He'd be against that. But he didn't think there was a conflict between law and order and freedom. He thought law and order is how you put a society together. So he really believed in the laws as the good.
A minute ago, you talked about the people he didn't like, but there were people that he liked that I was surprised to find out about. We were talking about this earlier, about Senator McCarthy.
Yeah.
He was very fond of
He liked him,
Joe
and
McCarthy.
he brought him down. He had a hand. He wrote the resolution condemning him. But
But where did that come from? Why were they so close?
You're not Irish, are you?
I'm part Irish. The name is Buckley. There's a little bit of Irish.
I know,
there,
I
pal.
heard the name, but we'll see. I think it was that. It was very close. Bobby had a tremendous affection for Joe McCarthy, and it's one of the things that matured in his life. He saw that the guy was bad. He abused his authority. He was reckless, drunk. He thought Roy Cohn, his top aide, was leading him to horror. There's a wonderful thing in it. In fact, Ethel was surprised that I brought this up with her when I interviewed her about this. And I said, Bobby starts talking about Roy Cohn as taking Joe McCarthy up onto a mountain and showing him all the beautiful things. If he just did what he was doing, kept getting publicity and doing all this communist chasing. And I said, that's in St. Matthew's Gospel. That's about the devil taking Jesus up onto a mountain and showing it said, if you bow down and worship me, I'll give you all this, the world. And she was stunned. I said, this is what Bobby thought of. He thought Joe was Jesus, and he thought Roy Cohn was the devil. I mean, it's overdrawn, but I mean, he really hated Cohen. And he saw McCarthy drinking himself to death, and he broke with him and joined the Democratic side, then wrote the resolution against him. But all that time, he maintained his closeness with him. And I've got Ethel talking about going over to see him, and he would grab Kathleen, who was like a year old, and hug her and say, she's mine. And he was so friendly to the family, and yet Bobby knew he was drinking himself to death, and he'd sit with him while he's in a stupor. He wrote in his diary he's been drunk the last 3 days, the last 3 hearings. He saw the guy destroying himself after the censure. And yet, and this is what I like about Bobby, and yet knowing all this and knowing he could only do danger or damage to Jack's chance of becoming president, because nobody liked McCarthy at that point. When they got word that McCarthy had drank himself to death at Bethesda Naval Hospital, Kathleen said he was so distraught that he drove around the airport 3 times. He was just overwhelmed by it. And he said, it was part of my past, but I just I can't deal with this. And he went to the funeral. 70 senators, by the way, went to the funeral in the Capitol building. And then 4 of them went off to the actual burial in Appleton, Wisconsin, where McCarthy came from. But Bobby was on that plane, but then he snuck off the plane, found a reporter that would take him to the gravesite, and had the guy promise, asked him not to tell anybody. He didn't tell anybody for 20 years that he was there. And he sat in the car by himself just to show his respects for his old boss. And he never wanted anybody to know about it. He did it for himself. It's just character. And Jack and Teddy both said that's what they respected most about their brother, that he was loyal, with no gain, and knowing the guy's imperfection. He was something. He was the guy that when the Cuban exiles were all captured by Castro and everybody else had forgotten about them, Bobby's the one that got him home. And Bobby's the one that got all those African-American kids out of jail in 1963 when the Birmingham, the police were hitting them all with fire hoses, and they arrested them all. And he got them out, secretly going with Belafonte, with the labor unions, raising all the money from the labor unions so that he could get them out, not getting any credit for it. And he did a lot of these secret things and took a lot of heat from the black community because they knew where they could find a guy they could move, and they really hit him pretty hard in those meetings. And he ended up being the one that went to Jack and said, you got to go on national television, and you got to be for the civil rights bill right now. And I got the tapes. That's what he was the one that pushed his brother. So, I like the guy, and I like him because he's for law and order and for the downtrodden people both. And I think he was a uniter. And I think we don't have one now. We don't have a uniter.
You talk about the uniter, and I was thinking about the speech that he gave after Martin Luther King was assassinated in Memphis, and he appears before a group of African Americans in Indianapolis who don't know.
Well, he had to go in. He had made a commitment. He had campaigned that day at University of Notre Dame. They got killed on Saturday, actually, and Ball State, and he got the word as he was getting on the plane to fly to Indianapolis that the King had been shot, killed, and he knew his next stop was a ghetto, a tough neighborhood in Indianapolis, and he didn't know what it was going to be like, but he said, I better go. I have to go now. He couldn't hide from it. He couldn't dodge it. So he went into the community. The police would not go in with him. He went in alone. He got up on this flatbed truck, and he asked the guy next to him, because I got the tape from NBC. I worked at it. I got the tape where he said, do they know? And the guy next to him said, no, they don't know. And this before, for young people here, that's before everything was Twitter and all that. We actually had to hear things word of mouth or watch the news. And I guess they didn't even have transistor radios, this crowd, because they didn't know. And they started cheering him when he came in, thinking it's going to be a rah-rah session. And he just said, well, look at the book, the quote. He just said, I got to tell you something. I can't talk long. I got to tell you something horrible. And this guy, your hero of all history, has been killed by a white guy. And all I can tell you is my brother, a member of my family, as he phrased it, was killed. And it seemed kind of awkward when I heard him say that, but that's what he was trying to show, in some awkward, the best way you can is just open yourself, take off your armor and say, look, I'm here. Do what you want with me. But we got to do something about this racial hatred. And
I actually took the text from his speech, and Bobby Kennedy said that night, what we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black.
Well, he made it up as he went along. It wasn't written for him, and he wrote it. And I think he was. What I liked about that speech was a couple things. One was we have to make an effort. He knew the racial issue in this country is not going away after 250 years of slavery and 100 years of Jim Crow and 50 years of whatever we've had. It's not going to go away. All you can do is make an effort every day, each person, make an effort. And he, after that was a good thing. He also said, say a prayer for our country and for our people. He was very religious, and he just knew that the problem was ahead of us. It was not going, there was rioting, and it was scary, and he didn't know how much the country would explode that night, which it did.
Except in Indianapolis.
Except that Washington, D.C. was burnt to the ground. It's all destructive stuff. There's no justification for it. Bobby hated looters and riot. He thought it was all awful. He understood why the impulse was there, but he thought it was awful that people were doing this stuff. They destroyed D.C. For what? Nobody got the message. They delivered any message. It was just horror. And he was trying to do his best, and I think he did his best.
You talked about the fact that he was...
This picture is his best. I mean, look at this. Look at it. Just like, he always rolled his sleeves up above the, he thought he had great forearms. And he always liked to see the forearms. He had, Popeye arms, And he loved to roll his sleeves all the way up. And there he is, I'm sure Rosie Greer or Rayford Johnson's holding him here as he goes through this crowd. Anybody could have killed him. This is like sacrificial stuff. His brother had been shot in an open car, and here he is on top of a truck, making himself totally exposed. And they were pulling his shoes off and his tie clips and everything. And it was something else. And
well, you talk about the Rosie Greer and the people around him, and I just wonder, is anyone in the crowd here, was anyone in the ballroom at the Ambassador? You were. Yeah. You were.
What do you know? No police.
And
that was weird, the whole thing.
To see the footage, people were just all over him. You what? You caught him. Oh my God.
Wow.
The thought of that.
You caught him when he fell? Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know. Yeah.
That scene, Chris. I'm sorry. Oh, he said that Bobby fell into his arms, and that he still has the shirt with the bullet hole in it. Your shirt, but you didn't get hit.
No, my sleeves were like Bobby's, rolled up, and where they had blossomed, the bullet went in and out, and hit Stroll, the other fellow.
Right.
Wow.
Because four people were hit, right, in addition to Bobby, or?
It was Linda Evans, Stroll, Wiesel, Schrade, and Ira Goldstein. Actually, 3 times. The third bullet went through the top of his jacket and hit Paul Schrade in the head, which was standing on my left.
Chris, do you have any questions for this man who was? He's right here.
What do you think?
About
The whole thing.
one person. I saw 7 of the 8 bullets come out of that gun.
So he said, oh, here we go.
I'm with you.
Tell us your name again and tell us what you were
My
saying.
name is Vincent DiPiero. I was a waiter. My father was the maitre d' for the hotel. I worked for Robert Kennedy from April 1st until June 5th. That Sunday before, we were out playing golf on the putting green at the Ambassador. Rosie Greer, my dad, myself, and Bobby. So the 4 of us were out there. Anybody could have came up and shot him. There was nobody. That night, I wasn't going to go. And my father had talked to Bobby, and he said he wants you to be there. We were going to the Factory, which was a club, and I didn't want to go. I was studying for finals. And he said, he's asked 3 times, you better be here. So at about 11:15 at night, I left the house, got to the hotel about 11:45. My dad said, you want to go up and get him with me? And I said, no, I'll wait down here. So from the time he came down, I walked out with him onto the stage, and as we came back after he made his speech, we went through the pantry, and that's when Paul Schrade got between me and Bobby. Otherwise, I would have been the one shot. And when Bobby got shot the first time, I had the only unobstructed view of the first shot. In fact, I'm the only witness that ever saw that first bullet hit him. That's in every book. I was 19. Next year, I'll be 69.
Can I ask you, did Bobby know what happened?
Well, Chris had mentioned something that was very interesting. He was always concerned about other people. On the floor, after he was shot, the first thing that he asked was, is everybody else all right?
Yeah, it's in the book.
That's no lie.
It's in the
There's
book,
less
too.
than 12 of us that ever heard that. That's actually what he said. We were trying to tell him not to talk. But we knew he was really badly injured, but we didn't know how bad.
When they went to move him, and he said, no, no. How did you interpret that?
That's correct. No, he didn't want to be moved.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, he kept saying that. One of the waiters gave him a rosary.
Yes.
We undid his shirt, and that's the only time I ever knew he had a hairy chest. That's the only time. But he was, on the floor, and basically he passed out on the floor, and then they revived him back in the ambulance. But I was covered in his blood and everybody else that was around me, because everybody fell on top of me. And so there was nobody between me and Sirhan. I was, for 19, I didn't react, I froze, which was scary. That's one of the things, Paul Schrade always wondered how he didn't fall over. I said, it's because you fell on top of me. And so I had Paul Schrade on my left, Bobby in my center, and Ira Goldstein on my right. And as I was falling down, that's when the bullet went through my shirt. So.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Yeah. Chris, the depth of feeling that comes over this crowd when you hear that story, it's still so very real today, this many years later.
Well, it is with the guys I was in the Peace Corps with. He was the one that sort of grabbed people. Jack was the prince, and he was the soul, and that spirit seemed to have survived the 60s, and that's why I wrote the book, and I think we need it now. We need it now.
We've talked about some of the people.
And I mean this thing about the Democrats and the working people, the waiters and all, and I think they got to find a way to reconcile. The Democratic Party cannot let that group of people who brought them to the dance to leave. They got to bring them back. And with all the effort with minorities, and it's all wonderful, they have to bring back the Irish, Italian, Polish. They got to bring those people back, and Eastern Europeans. They just are angry about something. Some of it's racist, I know, but a bigger part of it is just a sense of being discarded.
I think West Virginia is a perfect sort of case
feel
study
discarded.
of that, right?
They feel that they were passed by the economy of the country, the Silicon Valley. Everything's moving past them. The new arriving ethnic groups seem to be moving past them. They've just been. And it's not any political. It's a political. I think I'm not in the business except advising. That's all I do. And if the Democratic Party doesn't come up with some man or woman of any ethnic background, of any age, that isn't capable of restoring that bond, they shouldn't be the nominee. They don't need another Carole King concert. I'm sorry. They just don't need another one. I'm sorry. There's just too much self-celebration, and I keep wondering, what are they celebrating again? What are all these parties that they celebrate each other about? What is this? And how come nobody's invited to the party but them? And everybody gets the message. I don't like that party. I wasn't invited. Screw you. And I think that's the attitude a lot of people have about them. And I went to maybe they should have had that Springsteen concert about 3 months earlier. But they had it the night before in Philly, and I was there. I go, okay, connect with the people that got you to the dance. And don't forget them. As a friend of mine in the Peace Corps, John Katniss from Pittsburgh, used to say, people don't mind being used. They mind being discarded. And it's so true. Everybody's used. I mean, that's why I have fun together. Let's have a date. Everybody's using everybody. It's not a negative word. But when you discard somebody, that is negative. It's negative to discard a human being.
Yeah.
And whether it's your parent or your brother or your best friend. And I think there's a disillusionment on the part of the people in the state. I grew up in Pennsylvania. I was blown away when I heard that night. And guess who called me and told me they want to know what was happening in Pennsylvania? Kelly and Conway at 8:30. They didn't know they were going to win. They had no idea. Trump acts like God brought him to us. He didn't know what was going to happen. It was just a fluke of anger and resentment. And Hillary got caught in the draft of that, just that anger that was growing. And
Tell me about that phone call.
Now I know them all.
Was there a glee? Was it
no, it was just
surprise?
She was trying to be able. She's sitting next to Trump, and she's trying to tell him what's going on. So I'm talking to the former governor, and I'm talking to Boston, Philly, and some other people I'm trying to check in with, who I knew, and they finally called me up. The Boston, Philly, Bob Brady, the congressman, old school guy, just it's over. We blew it. It's over. He didn't say we blew it. He says it's over. And the numbers didn't come through in the burbs. That's what I think will change next time, the burbs. It's up to the Democrats to win back the rural areas and the poor people now. They're going to get the burbs back, I think. They're going to get back the people with educations, college educations. They have had it, I think, with embarrassment.
And is that Republican and Democrat? Is
My moderate
Virginia?
Republicans, I think, are embarrassed by the guy. Look at all the senators today coming out against this guy Moore. And in fact, when Mitch McConnell moves, you know something's going on. McConnell knows. Somebody said this about Jack Jarvis years ago. When that thing starts to come down on New Year's Eve from the top of the wall, you know it's happened. It's the new year. And McConnell just said, I believe the women. What a statement. He just said it. It was mind-blowing. I believe the women. Why would they make it up? I mean, why would anybody say something like this happen if it didn't happen? What would be the gain in it? I mean, this is the Republican people talking to them. They're not, it's just, this is strange.
Let's talk about it.
This is stuff that novels are written about, the strange personality that people are dealing with that they didn't know they were dealing with. And to say, hey, look, I'm the DA. I mean, you'll read about it in the paper tomorrow. I'm the DA, and you're 15. Huh? You're a kid. Do what I'm telling you to do. Don't tell anybody. What? It's just, it's going to be, I think they're going to drop him, but I don't know, maybe not, because if the guy sticks it out, if he sticks it out and wins, that's sort of a ratification of some sort of innocence.
And what happens? I mean, he's going to stay on the ballot. They can't remove him from the ballot.
Well,
let's say he wins.
What happens if Steve Bannon calls him up and says, the jig's up, get out of here?
Yeah, you think
Steve Bannon could do it? No, I don't think he's going to do it, but there's all kinds of possibilities. I just know Trump, I think, is absorbing this. When he said today, I'm too busy, I'm not watching television, that told me he was reserving judgment in his own sort of way, basic way. When you say I'm not watching this story on television, you're reserving judgment for tomorrow or the next day. He wasn't ready to commit. He's too busy fawning over Putin.
Well, let me
I can't even keep up with him.
Fawning over
can we,
Putin, as you put it, but also there was this tweet that came out over the weekend, and we talk about Bobby Kennedy and a time when words mattered and people cited poetry and all of that. There was this quote, this tweet that we woke up.
You mean a country to be proud of, right? People actually read things. They like poetry.
Right.
Sounds all right.
President Trump tweeted in response to the North Korean leader calling him an old lunatic. He said, "Why would Kim Jong-un insult me by calling me old, when I would never call him short and fat? Oh well, I try so hard to be his friend, and maybe someday that will happen."
Try to,
I thought that was from The Onion.
I'll get into literature. Let's explicate that sentence. Remember explicate? Let's explicate it. He didn't call him fat and short. He just did.
Right.
Okay, I wanted to be his friend. And what evidence do we have he's ever wanted to be his friend?
But when you read
get a
stuff
guy
like
who's seen as a deity by his people, then you trash him personally. You're not exactly building a foundation to get the people behind you from that country. You know, I don't think Roosevelt made fun of Hirohito for, I don't know, it wasn't the smart move. You know, you're sort of trying to get the people to get them a little nervous from the other direction. I think this guy, I wouldn't play with him, with Kim Jong-un.
But as a guy who's been around Washington forever, who's writing about this period of time of hope and unity and words and poetry, when you see tweets like this, and you're sitting in that chair in Washington, what do you
Look,
what are you
everybody,
thinking?
look, everybody here knows exactly the reality we're confronted with here. There's no hidden through a glass darkly thing going on here. He is what he is. And he gets up at 6:30 in the morning. According to Elizabeth Buehmer, the New York Times bureau chief, he gets the paper at that time. He physically gets his New York Times at 6:30 in the morning, and he starts tweeting. And it's always Groundhog's Day. It's always the same level of sophistication. He never changes. He barks out something that's some id inside him, and some id starts talking. And it usually has something to do with it. Somebody offended him. And he doesn't accept consequences. He doesn't know what one thing will lead to the next. I mean, leaders have to understand consequences. That's the primary thing they have to understand. If I do this, it will lead to that. And I don't know how, somebody thinks the market, why is the market going up under this guy all the time? Because they think he's going to deliver to them all the blessings of a big tax cut. And, oh yeah. Oh yeah. And yet the working people out there who don't have $22 million to give to their kids don't seem to mind that that's a big provision here, the getting rid of the estate tax, which $22 million you have to benefit from this. If you don't have a lawyer looking out for your accountants that figured out the thing already. And the corporate tax deduction and the top rate coming down from 39.5 to 35 is a huge amount of money for people with big money, huge amounts. And it's all going to capital. And I guess that's why the market's going up, because there's going to be a lot more cash going to stockholders. That's all I can figure is his entire economic plan, more cash to stockholders, which is good if you're in the market. It's not, but it's going to a certain group of people. And once again, the working people are getting skimmed.
Chris,
I just think it's strange, but we all know this. And in the end, there's going to be an Iowa, there's going to be a New Hampshire, and there's going to be a South Carolina. And we all say it's always going to be different every time. And there'll be a California this year, it'll be different. But in the end, it's going to be who shows up in the primaries. And if the Democrats are smart enough to run somebody who appeals to the center left and the center, enough of a center, and the left, they got to put it together again with a candidate who inspires people to vote and show up. Democracy is about numbers and getting people out to vote. It didn't happen last time. Our kids didn't vote, African Americans didn't vote enough, and the whole strategy of getting college-educated Republican women to turn the tide for you didn't work, because they didn't vote with the enthusiasm Hillary thought they would. They just didn't.
Ted wants to pass the mic around
Sure.
and take some questions from the audience.
So it's that time. Around here we have questions typically starting with a W or an H and sometimes a D. They are generally short. We do not believe in two-part questions, and only Frank Buckley gets to ask follow-up questions.
Good evening.
Hi.
Big fan, third generation
Thank you.
fan.
Generation?
We love
Usually
you.
people say, my grandmother loves you. I love
I was
that.
going to say that. My name is Leah Zeller. I work at RFK Community Schools, which is the repurposed Ambassador Hotel. Anytime you'd like to come and
I've
tour
read
the
about it,
grounds,
yeah.
and you, sir. But the question is, as you were writing the book, were you surprised by anything you learned that maybe you didn't know before?
A lot of it. How tough his father was. How much he loved his brother Jack. The Ethel relationship was solid. The early indications of sweetness, fighting for Ralph Bunche when he wanted Ralph Bunche to come speak at UVA to his lecture series, and the white kids he went to school with who he liked, but they were all Southern white kids. And this is 51 or so. Didn't want to bring an African American guy to speak there, and because they had political careers ahead of them. And he convinced the president of the school in this long letter, you got to let Ralph Bunche. He's not going to come and speak to a segregated audience. He was too proud. You're going to have to open up this audience. And he did it. Bobby Kennedy did that. I mean, there's sign. And then that night, Ralph Bunche stayed with he and Ethel, and they were throwing rocks in the windows. I mean, this is real stuff. I get chilled thinking about what that was like to do that as a law student. So these early signs of the guy, he could be ruthless and tough. He was like Michael the Archangel with a sword, but he had guts.
Hi, my name is Susan, and I have lots of thoughts, but the most important thought that I have is I was born 5 weeks before Pearl Harbor, and I fell in love with Jack Kennedy. I was in school in Boston when he was running, and then he was assassinated, and I was absolutely devastated. I was on the examination table for my second child, and the nurse came running in. Okay.
But that's good. Don't knock that off. That's good. You're about to have your second child.
Uh-huh. And it was absolutely devastating. And then a couple of years went by, and then Martin Luther King was assassinated, and then Bobby. And I went to sleep right after he spoke. I did not, and I woke up in the morning, and I was devastated. I couldn't get off the couch for a week because the impact of one thing after another, and it feels to me, except for maybe the last 8 or 9 years, that remember the movies and the cowboys with the good cowboys had white hats and the bad cowboys had black hats. It felt to me that all the guys in the white hats were being killed. And it is time for things to change.
Yeah.
I need to feel positive again.
Well, it was the first time in my life I wrote my congressman when Bobby was killed, because Johnny Carson came on TV, who never talked politics, and said, write your congressman, we got to do something about gun control. And Bobby, right to the end in Roseburg, Oregon, remember that? When the mass killings occurred 2 years ago? He went right in front of a bunch of lumberjacks. He was told by the sheriff, don't talk gun control here, they're all gun guys. And he said, how can a guy right away for mail order a rifle? And it was considered so exotic. Now today's it's Wild West, of course you get it right away for a gun. But he was trying to stop all that crazy. He wasn't so much worried about the conspiracy theories of who shot Jack as he was about something very tangible, stop people from getting guns by mail order, because that's how my brother was killed. And he was always thinking about what he could do to improve things, not get himself tied up in theories. But when I turned on the TV, I was up in Montreal at the time when Bobby was killed, and a guy I knew in my house, I knew off campus at Chapel Hill, was in North Carolina, was going up looking for a job. He was trying to get out of the draft, and I went up there for the weekend. I said, what the hell? I'd never been out of the country on my own, and I go, about 2 o'clock in the morning, we went out, we're trying to find a McCarthy-Kennedy debate on TV up there. The Canadian guys didn't have it on the TV. They were watching Lawrence Welk, and they're very nationalistic about it. But I got up around 2 or 3 in the morning, and I turned on the radio, and I thought I was listening to a reprise. I thought they were playing a tape of Dallas. What else could it be? And I was going to the airport the next morning, and a French-Canadian cab driver said, he was an ass. The guy kept saying, the giant has stubbed his toe. Yeah. He kept repeating it over and over again. He was so proud of being a nationalist, making fun of us. And I go, oh, Jesus. I just thought, my reaction to Jack was terrible beauty. I watched it over and over again in my head, of course, the riderless horse, and the beautiful, crisp day, and everything. Jackie's gorgeous beyond belief, and the whole family, and I go, this is the most beautiful thing in the world. But when Bobby died, there wasn't any terrible beauty. There was no Yeatsian experience. It was just a gray, gloomy day of loss. It was just something being subtracted from us with no glory or glamour or glow, just loss. And I thought that's what we all felt that day. And I think that Teddy was right in his speech, that it was just a basic guy trying to do, he saw suffering, he tried to end it, he saw war and tried to stop it. I thought that was beautifully put and simply put. And if you go to the Kennedy's grave, it's amazing to see the humility of Bobby's grave. There's a cross and the lines from Indianapolis and the lines from Cape Town. There's something humble about his legacy that I think gives it life, that allows it to seem alive, not gothic, but
There's
alive.
a question back there.
Hi, my name is Gary, and I was probably 11 or 12 during the Cuban Missile Crisis when we were all riveted to the radios. And I'd always heard that Jack Kennedy was persuaded by most of his military advisors to respond by attacking or invading Cuba. And I was wondering how important was Bobby to Jack making the decision to blockade?
Well, first of all, Jack was very practical. He understood that he had got warnings from Khrushchev, if you take Cuba, we'll go for Berlin. And of course, we all knew we couldn't defend our position in West Berlin with ground forces, with conventional weaponry. We'd be overwhelmed. It was, in one of my books, I talk about the numbers being Warsaw Pact forces like 350,000 men compared to our something like 30,000. It was outrageous. We would have lasted a couple of hours. So we would have been forced to using tactical weapons, nuclear weapons. So we knew we couldn't take an assault on West Berlin. And there's no way an American president could give it up or let it be lost. So Jack was always fearful in the Bay of Pigs and then the Cuban Missile Crisis that the Russians would use any action we took against them there as a cover for doing what they did. Like they did with Hungary in '56, where they used the Suez campaign. The stupid Brits and the stupid Israelis engaged in trying to get back the canal. I mean, that was a horrible thing, but it set up a big smokescreen for the Russians to grab Hungary. But the thing that I think probably, at least what I've been able to figure, it really turned the tide. So Jack knows the consequences, that we'd have to go to war, and maybe nuclear war would be a chain reaction if we bombed. He kept making that case, but LeMay wouldn't listen to that. LeMay, it's just like in that movie 13 Days, Army Bernstein's movie. It's a really good movie. The Hawks wouldn't listen. He kept saying, but if we do this, they'll do that. And the Hawks, they won't do anything. They'll just take it. And even Eisenhower was pretty much, he didn't understand. The Soviet Union, by 1961, took itself seriously. It had built itself up. It believed in what it could do. Khrushchev was really trying to challenge us and wasn't going to just step down. He wasn't just going to take it in the chin. And so what Jack was able to do, Kennedy was, he had XCOM, the sub-meeting of the cabinet he was using as his counsel. He said to Bobby, I think we're losing them. I think we're losing them. I think the LeMay side and the people on the other side and the National Security Council, Bundy, they were all moving in the direction of attack. Especially when we found out they had intermediate range missiles that could reach everything short of Seattle on the continent of North American continent. So what happened was Bobby starts listening to Dean Acheson, the old Cold Warrior, who I never thought of as a super hawk, but he was a hawk by 1962. He heard him talk about how we're going to go in there and bomb the hell out of the country and kill thousands of people and some Russians too, and that's what we're going to do, a big sneak attack. And he's listening to it. He says, God, that sounds awful. We're just going to kill a whole lot of people just because we want to remove a threat. And he said, he stood up before the group and said, we're Americans. We don't do that. We don't launch sneak attacks and kill thousands of people. Of course, W never got that message. So true. Anyway, he used a moral argument, and it sort of carried the day. And they said, we'll go with the quarantine, with the embargo instead, and it worked. Of course, he also played that little game of answering the first letter rather than the second letter. But he also was working in the back with Bolshakov, his contact with the Soviets, his back channel, and he dropped to him the idea of, okay, you take away ours, we'll take away the ones in Turkey, but we got to keep it under the table. Whether that was intentional or not, it did. The second letter from Khrushchev said, okay, how about those Turkish missiles too? So he may have given away the game, but giving away the game was the way to win the game. So there's a little bit of Neville Chamberlain with the Kennedys, a little bit of Churchill. It wasn't all about making the other side blink. They cut the deal that saved the world from a nuclear. As Jack and Bobby agreed, can we justify a global nuclear war over missiles in Turkey? Can we ever justify that to history? We had to explain. We had to be rational. Anyway, that movie 13 Days is so good, by the way. I think it's the best movie, Costner's movie. But anyway, I think it was Bobby's role was essential. In fact, at the end of it, two things happened at the end of the Cuban Missile Crisis, which got to me. One was Harold Macmillan, who didn't know about the Turkish deal, but he said, 2 great men got us through that. He meant the brothers. And at the end, Dobrynin, after they had already gotten the word that the ships were going back and they were going to take out the missiles, the deal had been struck. And I give it all to Khrushchev. Khrushchev saved the world too. That he was a man of humanity. They got the letter they got the message from Dobrynin. He wanted to give his personal, whatever you call it, good wishes to the 2 Kennedy brothers. He knew. In fact, Castro afterwards told Army Bernstein, who made that movie, and Army's a friend of mine, that he always thought Bobby was a good guy.
Okay.
We have time for 2 more questions.
2 more questions.
Hi, just have a question in relation to, do you feel that it's possible to have that humanity and moral conviction that he had in this day and age? And if so, do you see any candidates or people that have exhibited that at all?
Look, I don't know. I see a lot of welterweights out there. Welterweights, not even middleweights. This country's got dozens of welterweights. Could be the next. They all wait. They all thought Hillary would have her 8 years. There'd be plenty of time to wait. Nobody was ready for this to be, a incipient presidential candidate. Nobody's ready, really. Biden's ready. We'll see. Joe is a likable guy. He's been running for president since, I can't remember when he wasn't, and he always ends up not doing well. And I think his sons, or somebody said his surviving son thought that he might be ready this time. And I don't know. I have nothing but goodwill towards him, and I don't know. I know about, we were talking about on the show tonight, age, everybody, we had Vera Ragosa on tonight and Bradley Whitford, the actor, and they all tiptoe around the age issue. I don't think people should be tiptoeing around the age issue. Everybody who's in their late, I'm 72 this next month, I can tell you, anybody who doesn't think about it is crazy. Because you got to think about it. You got to be lickety split sharp if something goes wrong. And when you're late 70s going into 80 into 90, and we're saying, well, no problem. We don't need a Hindenburg running this country. I think you got to be thinking about who's got the sharps. The ideal presidential aide might be in his 50s. We ought to keep diversity in our mind and think it could be almost anybody. But you can't take somebody who's never had any executive experience and throw them into that job. You need somebody who's done something. I'm sorry, we have one.
Well, when you say no executive experience, I mean, senators don't have executive experience.
I know it's a problem. It is a problem for
So
senators.
you're saying you pick someone who's
I would like to think
governor?
somebody who knows how to make the decisions and has had leadership responsibilities. It could be a senator, but they've got a staff of 50 people or so. They don't have a lot of. Pat Moynihan, one of my heroes, said, "I have no executive ability." And somebody said, "Why didn't you run?" Because he was always saying, "How come I'm not on the list?" Because you talk like a Brit. That's why you're not going to get on that list. But I like all of them. I like smartest of them all. Probably Franken. Franken, but he has that sort of smirk. It's not. It works for me. Okay, but I don't know. If even Schumer works for me once in a while. It's an acquired taste, and I've acquired him. But he's not easy to love. Kirsten Gillibrand is fantastic, but she never goes on television. I don't know why. She's great. I don't know why she doesn't want to get on the tubes. Chris Murphy's okay, but he's another, lower, trainee guy. Kamala will wait. I don't know. I'm not big a fan of Booker yet because I still think he's basically an interview. That's all he is so far. It's an interview.
But he's got executive
There's nothing wrong with
experience.
him. I know he's mayor of New York. I know you can sell him all you want, but I think a little too much of a pleaser of the person he's interviewing. But I'm skeptical of some of them. I like Klobuchar, although I got problems there too. Yeah, dig deep. A lot of these people are incredibly likable to people like us who work on television or work in journalism and to the public. And you always think they're so nice. Then you find out they had 65 press secretaries over time. You got to dig on them. Ask how their staff liked them. And that's something you never get in the press because you don't know them till you know who's worked for them. And some of them are not nice. And they put on a big face that you like. And Jerry Brown has, he's going to go out pretty well. Jerry.
We got one more over here, Chris.
And our final question for the
Who do I
evening.
like? I want to come back and say something positive about some people. I like Sherrod Brown. If Hillary had put him on the ticket, they would have won. Sherrod Brown, gravelly voice, a little too left for me even, but he's okay. And he talks like a regular working person. He would have brought in Ohio, and he would have been able to say to Hillary and her people, hey, we're here for these guys and women in these tough industrial areas. We're not just for, Silicon Valley and so the hip New Virginia. But, I really think the Democrats have got to make a statement to the old industrial center of the country somehow. It's got to be a statement, we're with you. And also that you cannot have two moderate white guys run anymore. Those days are over. I don't know. Garcetti was on 2 nights, he's on last night, and he looked like on Friday was on. Yeah, I think he's running for something. I don't know. I know he's running. I think he's great. I didn't ask him the tough question I ready. Where are you on enforcement on immigration? Just tell me what the Democrats have an enforcement piece of this thing. Just tell me what it is, and then I'll believe you have a comprehensive program. You always say comprehensive. Let me hear all the pieces, and they always go running for the tall grass when I do that. But he looks good. I wasn't a big fan of his father, but I'm not into blood. Anyway,
Our final question for the evening.
you guys know better than I do.
Good evening, Mr. Matthews. Thank you for coming out. My name is Young. I'm 27. I graduated high school in 2008, and it was right around the time when the economy was crashing. And so for my generation, we really do have this kind of a distrust of things like the Paradise Papers and the whole idea of the elite. Even though we do live in California, we really don't like that. What would you say Bobby's or Mr. Kennedy's advice would be to people like myself who are really not old enough to remember the significant events that took place while he was around, but we read about it, we know about it, and...
What do you think it was different? How do you think it was different?
How do I think things are different now?
Yeah.
We have, I think, more information and we have it fast. We have names of people versus back then, and I think the information that comes, there's more of it. It's very overwhelming, but it's really interesting because right when we graduated is when everything really seems to be started to be happening. And processing it on our own terms is one thing, but I think a lot of my peers who really don't have that historical context to really, really break it down in a way that would be...
Why do you think that's true?
Back at me. No, I think. It's just very vivid,
But why don't people care about where we came from?
Where we...
Our country's fairly
Our
recent history of 50 years, 60 years, 100 years.
I think people are overwhelmed. I feel like in some ways people think they know
Is
where
it the
we
fact
came.
that people are studying how to make money in school and they're learning statistics and they're not learning any liberal arts?
Yeah, no, I really
think that's part of it.
Yeah.
I mean, Donald Trump didn't go to liberal arts. You can tell he doesn't know anything. He only knows, he doesn't know anything. And I look at him, I say, he keeps saying he went to an Ivy League school. No, he went to Penn, he went to Wharton, he studied business, and that's all he studied. He doesn't know anything. He doesn't know how the Constitution works. He doesn't understand checks and balances. He doesn't understand how a democracy works its will through its government, that the government belongs to the people, not to the guy who acquired it. And I don't think he understands it. And I really don't think he grasped the idea of why he doesn't own the FBI. And he says things like, I should own the FBI. It should be mine. He doesn't get it. He loves people like Duterte. He's over there letting them sing to him. He's not Tony Bennett. Why is he doing this? Why is he hanging around with and listening, believing communists? Why would you believe a KGB person? Go watch The Americans. They lie. Why would you believe what Putin says to you? What makes you think he's telling you the truth? When we were taught in school, Leninism, the idea of it is whatever the advances the communists cause is their idea of the truth. The notion, or in this case, Russia's purposes, this nationalistic stuff, is what the truth is to him. And to say that they had nothing to do with messing our elections is his notion of the truth. But it's not the objective truth. Why would Trump think it is? Why would he repeat that he believes it? He sounds like an idiot to do that. You can't repeat something that isn't believable to start with and say, well, that's why it's true. Anyway, your point is, let me just tell you something. When somebody says something like I do, and somebody says, well, that's history, like that's a put down, that bothers me. That's history. Like that's a put down. That's history. Well, it's not history's relevant. You have to know, you have to grow, and you have to learn. And I do think Arthur Schlesinger, who I used to think was pretty far left, I think he's a very centered guy, and he said, politics is essentially a learning profession. That like a dentist has to read the manuals, a doctor has to read the books, you have to keep up, or else you're not a doctor. You can't go by 50-year-old manuals and say you're a doctor, or 50-year-old manuals if you're a mechanic. You have to keep up, and if you're a politician, you must learn all the time. Bobby learned the hard way about McCarthy. He learned about the civil rights movement because he said, I'm going to learn this. If he had to get it bashed into his face by James Baldwin and some other people. And he learned it. And he learned how to deal with the Cuban thing. It wasn't instinctive at all. And I think his whole career is trying to learn. And that's why he would go down to some place like the Mississippi Delta to see what it's like to meet kids with distended stomachs, just like I saw in the Peace Corps in Africa, because they're only being fed crap like molasses all day long. All they're eating is molasses. And you just slowly die. And he saw that, and he came back to his family, and he said to his kids, you don't know how lucky you are. He was always sticking his neck out and learning stuff. And I think you have to do it too. We have to all do it, you know. By the way, the Phillies hat is very impressive. I want to say that to this guy. And now Chase Utley has finally had it. I love Chase Utley, but out here for the Dodgers, I finally had it. He struck out too many times watching that for it. Every night I went, he's going to hit a grand slam. He's going to do it again. He's going to go out like Babe Ruth. Nah. We love Chase Utley in Philly, you know, but he plays second base pretty well, though. By the way, sorry about that. I was a Dodger. I'm such a Dodger fan. I hate expansion teams. Okay? I don't like them. I like the Cubs, you know, the Phillies, the Yankees, the real teams, the real baseball teams. You know. I went off the tracks.
Yeah, a little bit.
Enjoy the book, and you're great. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.